We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to email us directly at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want you to know that your messages are likely to be heard, addressed, and listened to on air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
Hi, everyone. This is Lou Palumbo. This is Operation Truth. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Tom Fuentes, former Assistant Director of the FBI and a wealth of knowledge and an historian. Can't speak about the borders enough, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting to realize what this failed policy, this failed domestic policy is translating to. You don't have to listen to me or Tom. Just take a look at your major cities like New York, like Chicago, like Denver, like Seattle, like Austin, cities in Maine. I mean, it's starting to resonate across the country. We are overtaxing our cities. And what's happening is not only are we hemorrhaging money to support people who are illegal in this country while we neglect our own people, but we're losing tax bases in the cities. They're fleeing cities like New York in record numbers. The commercial real estate vacancy is about 50% right now in New York City. Guys, that's your tax base. That's the impetus to becoming Detroit. Detroit was the wealthiest city in the country in the 50s and 60s. Take a look at it now. You know, I don't know if we're intentionally mismanaging this issue. You know, I just cannot understand what people don't understand about a migration policy that lends itself to indiscriminately allowing people to come into this country we know nothing about. They're estimating 9 million approximate encounters. That's not talking about the 1.9 million gotaways, which are individuals who have been detected by technology primarily. I don't know what to say, guys, but you better get out and vote next November. You better screw your head on tight and stop thinking about the political entities you think you're attached to and think about the political entities that are going to protect you, your children, and the future of your children. It's that simply said. This isn't a complex conversation, ladies and gentlemen. I want to bring in Tom right now because I'm sure Tom can give an added perspective. I think we mentioned last time we watched the focal point of the drug trade shift in the 80s from South Florida over towards this poorest part of the country called the southern border, you know, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and California. And Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, California is having a fairly substantial problem in this community, Lacumba. Are you with me, Tom?
Yeah. Well, you start out talking about, you know, what happened decades ago when most of the cocaine, specifically coming out of Colombia, coming out of South America, was sent to the United States by fast boats, you know, these cigarette boats that are high power boats, or by airplane. And what they did is they configured King Air 300 aircraft with an extra gas tank so that they could make the trip from South America to the southern part of the United States, and then the boats also coming across the Caribbean to Florida and other states in the South. So that was the main focus of how the cartels in Colombia, the Cartagena and other drug organizations, got their drugs into the United States. So then eventually the United States says, okay, we got to stop this. And we're going to devote way more resources, balloons, dirigibles, drones, submarines, you name it. We're going to focus all of this effort to stop the shipment coming from South America by boat into Florida or by airplane into Florida, Georgia, the other southern states. So the Colombians then decide, they get smart and decide they're making billions on this cocaine trafficking. So they make the decision, you know, Mexican groups have been smuggling stuff into the contraband into the United States for 100 years or more. Mexican groups have relatives all over the major cities throughout the United States. So they would have contacts that handle these illegal shipments, in some cases, prescription drugs, in some other cases, different material that Mexican groups trafficked into the United States with assistance of their partners throughout the country. So the Colombians make a deal with the Mexicans and say, okay, we'll split it 50-50. You get our stuff into the United States, you can keep half the profit. And so that's what happens. They start sending this to Mexico. The Mexicans start bringing it across the border, and that goes on. Now, the original shipments from Florida, you saw depicted in the old television show Miami Vice. Sonny Crockett and Tubbs, fighting this trafficking with the fast cigarette boats going into southern United States. And the Colombians at that time, they would put their drugs on both 1, 2, or 3 of these boats, which are outrageously expensive. And then when one of our Navy ships or Coast Guard zeroed in on them, then they would split up and abandon 1 or 2 of the boats. And the main one would get through, and all of the money would come into the United States in any event. Aircraft, same thing. So now we have the initiative at the southeast border and the southeast initiative, and the decisions made wisely by the Colombians. Well, let's just partner up with Mexican groups. They'll get the stuff into the United States, and we'll just split it. And that's what happens throughout the 80s. And then later, that pretty much takes over. Mexican groups traffic, the cartels in Mexico grow strong, bribe the government, and there's all kinds of ways to get contraband into Mexico. You can come across the Caribbean. You can come up by land from South America, like some of the illegal migrants are doing now. So there's all kinds of ways to get the contraband to Mexico, to the Mexico-US border, and that's what happens. So now we have this epidemic at our border, and then and what do? The wise United States opens up the border. Then here, let us help you get more stuff across that border. People, drugs, fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, illegal drugs, whatever it might be, come on in. And that's what's happened now. So we have estimates of 9, 10, 12 million people that have come across that border illegally into the United States. And then our Border Patrol officers that, try to control this, they've basically been reduced from enforcing our laws at the border to Walmart greeters. Welcome to the United States. Come on in. What can we give you cash? Can we give you a phone? Can we give you an airline ticket? Come on in. And that's where we're at right now.
What's interesting in this conversation, Tom, is the FBI director, Christopher Wray, 9 months ago now, cited the fact that the southern border of the United States is a threat to our national security. Recently, 10 senior executives of the FBI, former assistant directors like Chris Schwecker, another gentleman, Tim Healy, who was he was the director of the terrorist screening center for the FBI. 10 FBI agents constructed a letter and delivered it to the Congress as to their concerns in regards to the security of this nation. It's falling on deaf ears, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what to say to you. If you are content with what's going on, stay the political course or continue to embrace the political ideology that you do and watch what the fallout will be. I have committed myself not to promote political entities. I hate to insult people's intelligence because that's what's going on every day. You just heard what I just said, which is verifiable. It's irrefutable. Yet they continue to allow people to flood into this country, even to this day. Just for the record, Tom, I want to just gloss over this most recent agreement that they wanted to sign about this border bailout that would allow 5,000 migrants a day to illegally enter this country. Multiply that times 365 is 1,825,000 illegal people coming into this country every year. When you double it, it's 360. When you double that, it's 7,200,000 plus. When is enough enough? When is the American public going to pull the head out of the sand and stop worrying about your iPhone, your vacation, your laptops, your cars you're driving, and pay attention to what's being done to this country and to the future of your children? Tom, I know you have a lot of opinions on this as well. I'd like to take you into a discussion, Tom, about foreign policy. We brushed upon it in one of our prior episodes. And I even asked you about the last legitimate war that we engaged in. And just for the record, ladies and gentlemen, we've gotten into this practice of defining these wars as police actions, as what we did in Vietnam. It was a war. We lost 58,000 Americans in that war. Oh no, police action. Can't figure out what it is. But this all couples and ties into the history lesson Tom's capable of giving you that talks about World War II and transitions through a couple of decades, bumps into the Kennedy administration, the assassination of this man, the loss of the innocence of this country, and the sudden realization of the military-industrial complex, which really steers the country. Tom, I want to talk to you first about World War II, its significance, which I know you are intimately knowledgeable of, and the fact that it was the last legitimate war that we fought.
Okay. What are you,
So-
I'm not sure what you're
Well,
asking.
Well, what I'm asking you, Tom, is World War II was the last legitimate war that we had a real legitimate need to engage an enemy. After that, we bumped into Korea. Korea, the first indication of this military-industrial complex. Your opinion?
No, but back to World War II. You know, right after Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issues an executive order, number 9066, which basically calls for the internment of Japanese residents on the west coast of the United States. 125,000 were rounded up, put in 75 concentration camps for 2 or 3 years because they were worried about the threat. Now, most of those Japanese that were locked up were US citizens. They owned houses, they owned business. The government said, you have 6 days to liquidate your businesses and report to, you know, the place where we're going to ship you to the camps. So pretty much they lost all their money and they were rounded up for a couple of years. Now, when I was an assistant in charge of the FBI in San Francisco, I got to be friends with the chief of police of Gilroy, California. Now, Gilroy is famous in California for having the annual Garlic Festival. But anyway, we got to talking. He's Japanese American, and he was telling me he was born in one of the internment camps during that time of World War II. So in any event, later, he's a loyal American citizen, very patriotic, and later goes on to be chief of police in Gilroy. But that's what happened. And a lot of the people he knows, a lot of friends of his, spent the first 2-3 years of their life in an internment camp, much less the adults and the older people that were locked up there. Now, later in 1988, Congress awarded $20,000 apiece to the Japanese Americans that were locked up as reparations. So that was kind of the fallout. And then later you have the apology of the government. So those reparations and the apologies were being issued during the Ford administration. What's ironic, I've read a couple of reports that the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, opposed rounding up the Japanese and putting them in these camps. So, but that's an aside. So anyway, that's what happened in World War II. Later, you know, the wars like in Korea, later Vietnam, you know, we start funding billions of dollars, even $1 trillion like Vietnam, and we don't win. And so a lot of people that are knowledgeable of the military are saying, you know, it sure looks like we don't want to win. We want to fight perpetually and keep funding it, make the war a cash cow. So Vietnam, for example, we spend $1 trillion. We start sending troops in 64, and by 1968 or 9, we have 500,000 troops there. We don't finally pull out of Vietnam until April 75. You see the helicopters leaving the U.S. Embassy, people hanging off the helicopters trying to get out of Vietnam. Now, interestingly about Vietnam, which goes into another history lesson that we've talked about, the Kennedy assassination, in the 1950s, John F. Kennedy is a U.S. Senator. And he's a hero from World War II, captain of the PT-109. The ship gets cut in half by a Japanese destroyer colliding with it in the darkness of night. And Kennedy helps his crew swim to shore, and he's dragging a couple of them, and he hurts his back, which later, hinders him the rest of his life. But in any event, Kennedy is knowledgeable of war. He's a war veteran, and friends of his died in World War II. So in any event, while senator, he goes to Vietnam in the 50s, meets with the French commanders. Now, the French were there throughout the 50s fighting against the Viet Cong and, groups in Vietnam. And he meets with the French generals who tell him, whatever you do, whenever we're lucky enough to get out of this place, don't you think about coming here. It's a quagmire. You'll be bogged down. You can't win. It will be horrible. So Kennedy, he never forgets that. He remembers that he was cautioned about fighting a war in South Vietnam. So now, later, when he becomes president, he comes to learn that we've got 15,000 military advisors in South Vietnam advising the Vietnamese army. In October of 1963, he issues a presidential order saying, I want all U.S. military advisors out of Vietnam, returned to the United States by the end of 1964. So he gives a year's notice to the military, get out. Now, interesting about that, he gets assassinated November of 63. Within a couple of days, President Johnson countermands Kennedy's order and says, no, send the troops in. And within a couple of short years, we have 500,000 troops in Vietnam. We spend $1 trillion, and we have 58 or more thousand killed, and how many other tens of thousands that are badly wounded, maimed, amputee victims, you name it, from that war. Now, you talk about the military-industrial complex. Kennedy gets sworn in as president January of 61. A couple of weeks before he's sworn in, President Eisenhower issues his farewell address to the nation. And during that address, he issues the warning, basically, beware of the military-industrial complex. They're going to be in a position to control policy, to have decisions made on their behalf, and they're basically going to be making money off of these wars. And so you have a number of military people saying that really, from the 50s, from Korean War, of course, that was a United Nations effort, but later, Vietnam and a series of other wars that follow, we don't really fight to win. We just fight to fight, so we can be a cash cow for our military. And the military makes tons of money off of those wars. So you look at Iraq, you talk about foreign policy. You look at Iraq, we invade in 2003. We take over. We help the Iraqis put their leader, Saddam Hussein, on trial once he's captured. They hang him. And where is Iraq today? We don't have any control there. We have 2 bases left, and they want us out. They're kicking us out. So that's part of the interesting thing of what happened with Iraq. Now, if I should back up, I skipped over a step. We have Desert Storm. In 1990, Saddam Hussein decides, he gets in a dispute with Kuwait about whether they're stealing oil from him at the southern border of Iraq, which borders with Kuwait. So Saddam Hussein says, enough of this. He invades Kuwait, sends his military, and at the time he has the 4th largest military in the world. Sends his military, they occupy Kuwait, and the war is on. Now what happens is the United States gets very little of its oil from Kuwait, but a lot of other countries get a lot, including Japan. Japan gets 80% of their oil from Kuwait. So Japan convinces the United States, put together a coalition to go into Kuwait, kick the Iraqi army out. We'll pay for the war. And that's what happens. So we put together the coalition, and we go in and remove Saddam Hussein's military from Kuwait. The Japanese end up paying the U.S. Later, Colin Powell gives a speech where he says, that war, Desert Storm, was the first time in U.S. history we made a profit in a war. The Japanese gave us more money than we spent. to kick the Iraqi army out. Now, meantime, the Iraqi military is on the highway from Kuwait, heading back to the border of Iraq. And then from the border to Baghdad is another 240 miles. So basically, our military, Schwarzkopf in charge of the U.S. Army in the effort of, Desert Storm. And so the Iraqi military is on the highway, tank after tank after tank, bumper to bumper. And our military jets are attacking them, taking them out one at a time, like a turkey shoot on the highway. President George H.W. Bush, who had been head of the CIA, orders the military, stop. No more killing Iraqi soldiers or tanks. Bush, first President Bush, was head of the CIA. And at the time, in the 1980s, Iraq and Iran fought a war with each other to a stalemate. Eventually, in 1988, the UN intervened and said, stop killing each other and all of that. And that's what happens. But they're using chemical weapons and all kinds of bad stuff with each other. And thousands of Iraqis and Iranians are dying. So eventually, in 88, they basically agreed to just stop, kind of ceasefire, and they leave it at that. But Iran and Iraq are bitter enemies. Now, Iraq is a Sunni Muslim country. Iran is a Shia, which is Persian Muslim. So they don't like each other except when they have somebody else to fight against. But at the time, they're fighting against each other, blowing each other up. So President Bush realizes that, first President Bush realizes that if we take out Saddam Hussein's army in 1991, we're handing that whole region, starting with Iraq, over to Iran. Iran will govern. And we hate Iran. They hate us. They're calling us the Great Satan because in 1979, the Iranians take over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and hold many of our embassy employees hostage for almost a year. So they're a bitter enemy of the United States. So we don't want to take out Saddam Hussein, or we'll be handing the region over to Iran. Well, ironically, when George W. Bush issues the orders to go in and take out Iraq and take out Saddam Hussein, that's where we're at today. Iran controls those areas, controls Iraq, controls the surrounding countries of Iraq. We handed Iran the keys to the kingdom. That's where we're at today.
Tom, it's funny that you explained this just the way you did, which is spot on. Back when we first went into Iraq, what I said, and I swear this to you on my children, we're going to destabilize that country and we're going to destabilize the region, which is something we've apparently done. Ladies and gentlemen, what Thomas just explained to you, this starting with the Kennedy assassination, we're living with the fallout of that today. This military-industrial complex, which ironically, a military leader, Dwight D. Eisenhower, warned us about, is controlling a lot of our foreign policies. Our foreign policies are heavily defective. And I hate to be critical of the Bush family because I've met them both. I'm personally very fond of them. Herbert Walker Bush was a good man based on my assessment. I met George W. as well. But the policies and the truth are the truth. And we keep going down this damn rabbit hole, which translates to loss of lives of our children. We don't hesitate to slaughter our kids. But our foreign policies and the faultiness of them came to light as a result of this Kennedy assassination 60 years ago. It cannot be emphasized enough that we haven't learned. And the American public, I go back once again and say, they think so little of you. We continue to perpetuate this. Tragically, we lost our innocence November 22nd, 1963, and we started to deal with the rude awakening as what and who was really controlling this country. And the question today, is it fixable? Can we turn it back? I know people criticize Donald Trump immensely, but Donald Trump's position was not to be engaged in war. Tom and I have spoken about Nikki Haley. Tom and I are both very conservative in many ways, by the way, especially when it translates to your safety. Nikki Haley, if I understand this correctly, is a backing from the military-industrial complex, and she speaks to the need of supporting the Ukraine. And as I said to you, I don't think Zelensky's exactly the poster child of piety. There's a whole backstory to Ukraine that Tom can explain to you about my concerns with the Ukraine is, when do we stop pouring money into this place? When does the American public ask this government, this one presiding today, when are we going to start taking care of our own people, our homeless, our indigent children, regardless of ethnicity or religious denomination or culture? When do we start taking care of our veterans? I spoke to you guys about this in a prior podcast, that we have a Tunnels to Tower organization that does more for our veterans than the country that they served, that they build homes that are compatible to them, that they pay mortgages off for veterans that lost their lives, their families, first responders, firemen, police. Why isn't the government doing this? We're preoccupied with pouring money into what I consider to be a money pit. And I think Tom and I want to speak to Tom, but I agree that should be some support of this government in the Ukraine. Proportionately, though, I think that was a point that Donald Trump made, and I'm not promoting Donald Trump, don't get the wrong idea. But he went to NATO and said, we are disproportionately supporting efforts in NATO when you're actually engaged in commerce with countries we're protecting you from. Guys, the cuckoo left the clock here in this country. We have to try to get it back on track at some point. If you listen to Tom, he gives you an enormous amount of historically, please excuse me, historically based information that create a timeline, if you listen to Tom, starting with this Kennedy assassination, even before, but takes us into present times and gives you the format for why we're living what we're living today. You know, and all I do, and Tom argues this with me, as do other individuals that have been on the show, that we've overpopulated this country to the extent that we can't manage it. And we're preoccupied with managing the woes of the world. You know, it's Israel now. I'm not saying don't help Israel. We have to help Israel. Western-based civilization and a critical part of this country. Tom, I want to transition this into into Iran, because you mentioned Iraq. Iran now has a foothold of some type of influence, and now it's resonating in our foreign policies once again. Am I correct?
No, absolutely. No, Iran has huge control over their neighbors, the region there, including Iraq. And, that's what we're stuck with, basically. We created that. We destabilized Iraq completely, taking out Saddam Hussein. Now, the interesting thing about that is that after 9/11, Dick Cheney, Rumsfeld, the neocons immediately started the chant that Saddam Hussein was a co-conspirator with bin Laden and Al-Qaeda to help in the attack on the U.S. on 9/11. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Saddam Hussein and bin Laden hated each other. Saddam Hussein had issued orders throughout Iraq, no safe haven for Al-Qaeda. He didn't want them coming in. He didn't want them theoretically then destabilizing his government. So he in no way supported the attack on 9/11. But Cheney and Rumsfeld, got it, and the other neocons gathered up their wits and thought, let's go into Iraq. Let's overthrow Saddam Hussein. Let's say that he's got nuclear weapons. Let's say he's got a biological weapons program. Let's start all of that based on false information, and then stir up the idea that we could go into Iraq, depose Saddam Hussein. Our military would have a cash cow for many years, which it did. That all turned out to be true. So that's what ended up happening. That was the impetus for the Iraq War. That goes on. You have people that participated in the talks with President Bush in the Situation Rooms immediately after 9/11. And people were already bringing up there, well, Saddam Hussein did this. Iraq was behind this. Now, one of the interesting things, I'll back up a little bit to President Kennedy. President Kennedy had disputes with the CIA about the intelligence that they were providing. During the Kennedy administration, they started the Defense Department, DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. And it basically was so that there would be a separate agency receiving intelligence from the field, from the soldiers around the world, that could contradict what the CIA was saying. So that was DIA. Later, we have General Flynn being put in charge of that before the Obama administration goes after him, sabotages him. But in any event, back to Iraq and Iran, Cheney, it's well known now that Cheney met with intelligence officials from the CIA and from the DIA and was telling them, you will find the link between Saddam Hussein and 9/11. You will. That's what we want to hear. And that was the politicization of our intelligence agencies, which goes on to this day. That still goes on. So anyway, he's demanding that they provide the information to justify a U.S. attack on Iraq. And that's basically what happens. So you have the media, you have Colin Powell get caught up in this, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, later Secretary of State. Powell, he's at the UN. And originally the United States was going to invade Iraq in the fall of 2002. Colin Powell talks George W. Bush into delaying, let him go before the United Nations, hold up the vial, this could kill millions of people, show pictures of they're transporting nuclear weapons on these trucks. They're doing this, they're doing that. Colin Powell does that presentation. And when you watch the video of him doing the presentation, seated behind him, George Tenet, head of the CIA, who's basically looks like he's going along with what Colin Powell says, that's what they have, a weapons program, nuclear and biological and chemical, in Iraq to kill everybody. They're a threat to us with that program that they have. And so that's what you have. So the net result of that, by the way, which I experienced, was that we were going to invade Iraq in the fall, and by early spring have control of the country. What ends up happening, because the invasion is delayed till after Colin Powell's presentation, we don't go in until late March. In May, you see George Bush landing, in the jet fighter on the aircraft carrier. Behind him is the big banner, mission accomplished. We've taken out the power of Saddam Hussein. We're controlling Iraq. So that's our doing. We do that. And that's what happens. That begins, trying to destabilize the Middle East like we have now. First, George H.W. Bush does not defeat or wipe out the Iraqi army in 1991, 1992. Now, 2002, 2003, now we're going to go in and finish that job. George W. Bush is going to invade, and we're going to take over, and we're going to straighten everything out. And we're paying for that disaster. We were paying at the time in human lives and in money from our treasury, but we're paying to this day because we put Iran in charge of the whole region, and they're still running it today. So that's where now we can say, well, Iran is supplying missiles to Hamas. They're supplying missiles to Hezbollah. They're supplying the Houthis in the Red Sea, who are attacking our ships and shutting down the shipping lanes. Boy, that Iran, they're doing all this terrible stuff. And then meantime, we accuse them of killing our 3 soldiers in the military base at the border of Jordan, and that were just killed, a couple of weeks ago. So that's all a result of our disastrous policy to take over Iraq. And then, we don't leave after a couple of years. When we leave Iraq, it's not a diplomatic agreement, with the Iraqis telling the U.S., oh, thank you so much for getting rid of Saddam Hussein. You did us a great favor. We're really glad you came and invaded our country. No, the insurrection rises up against us so strong by that time, we sneak out in the dead of night. You remember the videos of darkness, our caravans leaving Iraq to get out while we could. So once again, our foreign policy in that region has been horrible for many years to this day.
I think, Tom, that the foreign policy of the country, starting with it being brought to our attention during the Kennedy years, has been horrific, and it continues to be horrific. What we witnessed with this withdrawal with Afghanistan was shameful. Clearly leaving $85 billion of weaponry, surrendering Bagram Air Base, that was pretty significant. But what we did with the women and the young girls in that country, abandoning them after we sold them a bill of goods, I don't know what to say about our country. Listen, I love this country. I've traveled this world. I've traveled this country up and down, east and west. There's no place like it. It doesn't mean we're perfect. The exercise is to learn from these mistakes, Tom, but we don't seem to learn. That's the part that so we're talking about.
We don't
Iraq.
want to learn, Lou. We don't want
so-
to. Deliberately, we don't
Why?
want to.
Why, Tom? Why, Tom?
So that the next war comes along and we can go over to the new spending, the new cash cow. We don't know where. Could be in this country, that country, Asia, Europe, Africa. But there will be another one, and our military will get rich off of it. That's the main objective. So you don't want to learn a lesson when you want to repeat it over and over again. That's why.
The thing
Not
is,
a
Tom,
mystery why
it
we don't
comes up-
learn.
it comes at the expense of human lives, though. In Vietnam was 58,000. In Iraq and Afghanistan, we're still counting because we lose about 22 children a day to suicide, period. Not
Don't
to
mention in Iraq how many million civilians were killed by this whole invasion. Don't mention all of that. That collateral damage, who cares? Do we really care? I mean, really? I don't think so.
Well, you're starting to wonder if we're a soulless country. And, I just hope at some point in time we see the light and the error in our ways, and we learn and start to take this country in a different direction. I hate to go back to Donald Trump, but some of his ideas in regards to how he embraced the world as a whole, I hate to say it, Jamie Dimon said it, were right on point, how he handled China. This reluctance to be involved in war, establishing a balance with NATO, all of these policies protecting our border. Guys, I know you don't like this man. I got the memo. We didn't send him to finishing school. You could call him uncouth, undignified, any number of adjectives. But I tell you this about this guy, which you don't get. He loves this country. I listened to them spreading lies about a threat to democracy. And we're now going off on a tangent, and Tom's going to come in on this in a second. The only people that are threatening democracy today are Democrats. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Republican. I'm saying that to you because I'm an American. And I've lived a long time in this society, and I've listened to and seen a lot. And they attack your civil rights. They attack your free speech, by the way, guys. We want to control what's being said. They're talking about attacking amendments in this Constitution, like the Second Amendment, which, by the way, as we're telling you not to own assault rifles, we're flooding the Ukraine with them and flooding, I think, Israel with them at the same time. We need management in this issue. We've adopted this policy in this country of just intentionally lying to you. I don't know if there's a nice way to say it. We just lie to you. Foreign policy, Tom has just outlined it for you. This was a big lie about Iraq to promote a political agenda, which translated to the military-industrial complex and a demographic in this country making an enormous amount of money at the expense of our babies. How are we supposed to feel comfort in sending your children into the military with this skewed agenda? We just take advantage of this love and this patriotism that these kids that join the military feel, their dedication, their love, their blind dedication to. Look, I went to Camp for Heroes just outside of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. What I witnessed there would bring you to tears. These kids came home in pieces, men and young men and young women, multiple limbs off one individual, both arms and another individual with his face burnt off. He'd been a captain in the military. It burnt in my brain. More of our people need to go take a look at this so you start to understand the fallout of foreign policies. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back to you. I hope Tom continues to give us history lessons. We can't talk enough about the Kennedy years because they resonate with us today, guys. That was our wake-up call. And unfortunately, the American public, we suffer from benefiting from such good fortune, and it distracts us from things that are important. We're going to come right back, guys. Stay with us, Operation Truth. Communicate with us through Operation Truth Official at gmail.com. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, I am TJ Stone, the producer of Operation Truth, and I'm just taking a moment here to remind you to go follow us at Operation Truth Official on TikTok, and you can find us at Operation Truth Official on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We don't do as much on Instagram for reasons. On X, formerly known as Twitter, you can find us at Operation Truth and the number 7, Operation Truth 7. And always email us at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. Be a part of this conversation. Join the operation.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen. I have with me, as always, my colleague, Tom Fuentes, former Assistant Director of the FBI. I'm not going to be his PR guy, but I love talking to this man. I learn every time I talk to him, and I love people smarter than I am. And in a lot of ways, Tom is. But Tom, we keep talking about the borders, and the borders are incredibly significant today. And you know what? You're bumping into this conversation on a regular basis now about Chinese migrants coming into the country. And I know you know a little bit about the history that might be attached to this. Give us a little insight, Tom. What's going on here?
Well, we don't know positively what's going on, but what we could maybe say is going on is that maybe China is taking a page out of our playbook from the late 1950s, where we recruited members of the U.S. Marine Corps and the Navy that were assigned to the naval base, U.S. naval base at Atsugi, Japan. That naval base served as air traffic control for U-2 spy planes that we were sending over the Soviet Union to spy on them. One of the people that joined that program, pretending to be a communist, pretending to be a defector, wanting to give up their U.S. citizenship, Lee Harvey Oswald. So Oswald and these others, they go to the Soviet Union. He eventually, when he gets there, he gets assigned to the city of Minsk, the capital of Belarus. Now, the Soviet KGB was well aware that this was a U.S. program. They had a name for it, and okay, here they come. And what they did was, as people like Oswald arrived in a city like Minsk, they got fixed up with women who were KGB officers. And the idea would be that they would have a romance, they would get married, and then when the sailor left the Soviet Union, said, okay, never mind, I changed my mind. I'm really a U.S. citizen. I really don't want to defect. I want my passport back. And it was reported that Oswald, he leaves the Soviet Union and goes to Rotterdam in the Netherlands and meets with debriefers there, ONI and CIA. And he had taped to his chest notes that he had taken. In those days, they didn't have the electronic capability to secretly transmit. So what they were doing, he took notes, how the trains ran, how the telephone system worked, other methods of their government, all of that. And he meets with the debriefers in Rotterdam. He gives it to them, comes back to the U.S. Here I am, loyal American, giving my passport back. And he gets his passport within 2 months. Now, if you're a regular citizen and you apply for a passport, you're lucky if you get it. If you're applying from scratch, you're lucky if you can get it within 2 months. But he gets it, and he's back to here I am. And he brings Marina with him. Well, the KGB had a program where these women who were their spies would marry an American, come back with that person, get citizenship as a result of being married to the American. And then shortly into the marriage, they would start a fight or do something to provoke their husband into hitting them or abusing them somehow. Then they filed for divorce, and now they're in the United States, free and clear to conduct their espionage operation. So that's basically what Oswald did. The point I'm trying to make is that the program was an American program in the late 1950s. Now you have these very fit, well-dressed, well-groomed young Chinese men, military age. Suddenly they're on buses coming into the U.S. across our border. And what's the story with that? It's very difficult to get out of China. It's very difficult to get on a plane, bus, train, boat from China because of their social credit system. Now suddenly you've got 28,000 Chinese males that look like they're capable of being in the army right now come pouring into the United States. Why? Is this similar to our program from the 50s? Pretend like you want to be an American. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. How do we know? Do we know? So that's kind of the issue that I have with this. Meantime, U.S. senators like Dick Durbin from Illinois gives a speech on the floor of the Senate a couple of weeks ago saying, our military is unable to keep up adequate staffing. People don't want to join the Army, Navy, Air Force. But maybe we could sign up these Chinese people, join our military, and then that would be an expedited path to them becoming U.S. citizens, which has been done with other people. You come in from a foreign country, if you join the American military, it puts you on an expedited path to become a U.S. citizen. So maybe Durbin is saying, this could be a good thing. We could have all these thousands of Chinese people in our military. And then that would be fast-tracked for them to be citizens. And if they're citizens, then they can vote. That's what this policy looks at.
You know what, Tom? And why are you speaking about that? We're not only talking about letting them go into the military, we're talking about people that are non-citizens becoming part of our police departments, which creates a potential scenario that someone who may have accessed the country illegally is now going to arrest American citizens. This conversation gets funnier and funnier. Guys, we're going to have to wrap for today. I hope you understand, when you listen to the media, they're trying to teach you. They're trying to teach you about your country or politics or what you should believe in. We're trying to teach you as well. But the information we're providing you is far more valuable because it'll stimulate your thought process in an unbiased manner. We are not asking you not to question us. We want you to. We don't want to spoon feed you like Fox and MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, whomever it may be would like to do. We're not trying to tell you how to what to think. We're trying to get you into a mode of thinking in general. I will say this, based on what we're hearing, and I'm very skeptical of everything I hear in the media, it's like 80% of the country is tuned into this immigration issue. That Tom, once again, bumped into a very significant part of the discussion. We're only talking about one demographic, the Chinese. We have people coming from all over this country, coming from all over this world into this country. And I go back and I ask you this, who's benefiting from this? I get no answer. I will ask you this. Do you think the founding fathers, when they formed this country, said, you know what, and in the future, we'll let people from all over the planet come under the United States roof and get along, and we're going to tend to all their needs? It just doesn't work that way. But if you listen a little bit what Tom and I are saying, we're concerned about agenda. And that's really what's important with many of the individuals that are crossing this border. And for some reason, we have the Democrats that seem to want to ignore that. And I'm not anti-Democrat. I'm anti-anything that doesn't lend itself to the future of this country and our children. I thank you as always, Tom, for your wisdom. I know people that listen love listening to you, as I have for more than a decade. And I like listening to Chris Schwecker as well. He's another very, very brilliant guy. You are the historian in the family, though. I do know that, buddy.
Thank you, Luke.
This has been Operation Truth. You can contact Tom and myself through operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want to thank TJ Stone and Brian Williams in particular for helping us put this platform together. Guys, we don't want to just be a podcast for the rest of our lives like everyone else does. We want to get into a bigger platform and create an environment for you to learn or to listen to information that's helpful to you, that will guide you and help you understand the world you're living in, and to make this place better than you found it. See you next time, guys.